Hi, and welcome to the I Teed Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 73. What can daylight savings time teach us about compatibility? So, daylight savings time. You may have heard of it. In fact, if you're listening to this as it's released, this episode is just after daylight savings time, or the initiation of it. We've sprung forward. We are now in the future, right? I don't know. We're always in the future. Are we? I don't know. Anyway, time is weird, and daylight savings time makes it even more difficult, makes it even more weird. Because think about this. You have to roll your time forward in the spring and roll it back in the fall, and the days on which it happens, those can change. They can change by congressional appeal. They can change by people just not paying attention. They can change just because. So, time is arbitrary. We knew that, but we're not going to get into that in this podcast, at least. But daylight savings time was originally enacted in World War I as a cost savings or energy savings effort for the war. Basically, the United States wanted to save coal as a resource, and in order to do that, they basically tried to force people to awaken early on in the day so they had more daylight to do their normal job or to do their work, and then they would go to sleep after or before it was dark. Kind of how the whole concept was pitched and why it was enacted in the first place. And to be clear, it was only enacted for like 7 months in 1918. And then again in World War II, there was another round of daylight savings time, which ended in like 1941. And so this whole thing really was just to try to reserve resources during the war. But then in 1966, somebody thought it was a bright idea to just make it happen as a rule forever. So they passed a law in the United States that allowed for daylight savings time to occur. It used to be opt-in, and then it was just like, nope, you're going to fucking do this. Every state is doing this. And so now here we are. Everybody's doing it, except for Arizona, and there's probably one more. Arizona's the one I know about, because Arizona is, I guess, pretty progressive. I don't know. They're fucking on the border. Nobody gives a shit. They're living on the sun. They're weird people as it is. So anyway, the whole and entirety of daylight savings time is kind of made up. And what it has to do with compatibility, there's actually a couple of things. And yeah, imagine this. You're a programmer, and one of the things that you're doing with your application is you're having some sort of date or time tracking software. And because you don't want to confuse people, because Americans are apparently very bad at calculating UTC, one of the reasons is daylight savings time, you allow everybody, or you have to calculate the local time, and you have to calculate the local time zone. Now, you could do this by relying on the time zone that is set on the device, or set at the region, or set at the NTP level. But let's say you don't want to have any sort of external function for that to occur, so you have to create your own timekeeping standard inside of the application itself. For whatever reason that you have to do that. Trust me, nobody actually does this because it's really fucking difficult because of daylight savings time. You can see where I'm going here. Basically, as a programmer, it's extremely difficult for you to program time yourself because of daylight savings time. It's hard for you to calculate because daylight savings time can be arbitrary, because daylight savings time can be ignored based on your location. it makes it very difficult for you as a programmer to accurately get the correct time. Date, not as hard, because that's kind of standard set in stone. You'll always know what Tuesday is. You'll always know what Wednesday is, as long as nobody fucks that up, which is part of the reason why we also don't have a 13-month calendar. But that's a story for a different time, another one. Anyway, the whole thing with daylight savings time and programming is that if you're programming time from scratch and you're attempting to keep your time set, you are developing yourself kind of into this whole scheme where if you're having to calculate the hour, you just maybe not going to have the ability to get it accurately. And so for half of the year, your time is going to be wrong. And you're just going to have to pick which time of the year that's going to happen. Which half of the year do you want your time to be wrong? Because you could set it to a single time zone. You could set it to UTC. But again, you want to be kind of friendly to Americans. And so you want to program that in. And it makes that difficult. And not that it's ever going to necessarily stop an app from being developed, but trust you me, the more difficult it is to develop something, the less likely it is to get developed. And so if somebody's like, fuck time, goddamn, I don't want to mess with that, then, their app might not get made, or, whatever they're trying to do might not get made. But compatibility, it goes a little bit more beyond that, because in reality, daylight savings time doesn't have a good purpose in our modern society, in where we're living today. Yes, there is some cost analysis or cost benefit analysis here that you can do for it, but honestly, the risks kind of outweigh the benefit here. Because, for instance, with the spring forward daylight savings time that we just had, we noticed that there are over 40,000 more accidents in the United States on the following Monday. 40,000 more road accidents on average every year on the day following daylight savings time enactment than on really any other day in the year. Like it averages out. Somebody did a study, and it's a significant increase in road accidents because people are more tired. They have to wake up earlier, so on and so forth. Some of it actually has to do with wildlife as well. Spring forward, you're now driving earlier. Not only is it probably dark when you start driving to work again, but also all of the creatures that are around you aren't used to this many people being on the road. And so when these creatures, deer and others, decide that they're going to start walking across the road or do their normal feeding ritual, whatever it is, during the day, you're now starting an hour early, and this fucks them up because they don't understand. And so you're gonna have more interactions with wildlife just because you're up earlier, and they're not used to humans being around that early just yet. It settles out after a couple of days, but man, there is a significant cost of if not only monetary cost, but there may also be a human cost to it if the road accidents that occur at an increased rate cost lives. And so that there's a reason not to do this. The cost benefit may not be there. So what could you do? You could argue that yes, there is a benefit to having this, but then if there is a benefit, just enact it for the entire fucking year. Don't change it. Stop doing this. Oh, we're going to enact it here, and we're not going to have it enacted here, because it can cause an issue where you're not only confusing people, you're leaving a space for people to get confused, but it's really just kind of vestigial. There's not a purpose for it. we're not having to rely on really coal to power everything. We have alternate power sources. We have renewable power sources. And, if you just went nuclear, you wouldn't have this fucking problem. Or nuclear, whatever. You wouldn't have this fucking problem. You wouldn't have this issue. So that's kind of one issue of compatibility. If you're kind of having to fulfill this vestigial requirement to ensure that your application works in all aspects, you're going to have a bad time. Let me give you another example of where this actually happens in the development cycle. So as a app developer or website developer, we'll use a website developer. Most app developments are really just a fucking front end for a web page. Let's just get that out of the way. Most cell phone applications are just a front end for a fucking web page. They're not actually an app. It's just a goddamn shell for your web page. Stop making me download your fucking app. Let me use your goddamn website. You paid for it. Let me use your goddamn website. Am I bitter about this? I might be bitter about it. Anyway, websites. If you're a website developer, you probably have had to do a compatibility test. In order to do a compatibility test, you need to test different kinds of browsers. And compatibility, especially early on in the smartphone development cycle, it was very common for you as a website developer. You would have to have every type of fucking device at your disposal, so you could test your fucking website against it to make sure that it displayed properly and that the experience on each type of cell phone was the same. This was a huge issue because, for instance, if you had a website, there was a requirement for you to not only support like Chrome and Firefox and Safari, the big browsers, but you also had to support shit like Internet Explorer. And not only just Internet Explorer, the latest Internet Explorer that's out there, you had to support Internet Explorer 6 or Netscape, Netcrawler, whatever the fuck it was, Netscape. You also had to support like Opera and all of this. And all of these different types of browsers handle websites differently. And because you as an organization, as a professional organization, you want to make sure that your website is functional for all users. Let's say you're a bank. You want to make sure that your website is available for all users and it functions properly for all users. You have to, as that website developer for that bank, you have to make sure that each and every one of those browsers displays properly, that each button works the way it should. And so you have to build in all of that code into your website. And that is just a humongous fucking lift because not only you're making that website, you're developing that website for one type of browser, you're having to do it 16 goddamn times. And that code then has to get put into the website because you can't just like, oh, well, if you're an iPhone, you have to go to this website. No, you can't fucking do that. You have to have the same goddamn website present the website appropriately. And unfortunately, because of the way that the agent operates inside of the browser, your website, you might not be able to confidently use the user agent type inside of that's transmitted in the GET request. You might not be able to use that user agent type to reliably send the code. So you have to fucking code all of that shit in at once on that one web page. So you're having to write it 16 goddamn times, but not only 16 times, you're going to have to write it so that there's some sort of if-then statement that feeds the proper code to the fucking device that's accessing it. And it's a disaster. And you're having to do this because there are these vestigial pieces of shit, applications or devices or specific people who need it in this specific way, that makes it more difficult for you as a developer to program. And again, the more difficult it is to program, the less likely it is to get done, or sometimes the less likely it is to get done right. And we see this in cybersecurity all the fucking time. And this is one of the reasons why if you are in a DevSecOps environment where you are planning your application, if somebody comes up with a edge case scenario, you go, we're not going to fucking worry about that because we're going to make sure this is done right this way. We're going to put blinders on this. It needs to work in this very thin stream. And if it doesn't work beyond that, we're not going to fucking worry about that until we're sure that our shit is up to date, is secure, and is in line. So in compatibility, you are making sure if you are trying to make your stuff as compatible as it can possibly be, you're going to have a bad time. And it's going to lower your ability to do really everything well. You can do one thing really well, or you can do all of these other things really kind of okay. And it makes your focus, it breaks your focus, it makes things harder to do. Let me give you another example. And sometimes it doesn't even make things work properly. So in this other example, back in, I don't know, 2008, 2009, maybe 2010, there, in the early days, a long, long time ago, in the before times, a lot of us will remember, maybe not some of you youngins, but a lot of us will remember there was this computer card port, this expansion card port called AGP, Advanced Graphics Processing. This was a specific type of card that was a graphics processing unit, GPU, that you inserted into your computer. Now, if you're thinking about this today, you're probably like, oh, well, it's like PCI Express. Every card uses PCI Express. You may think that everything's a PCI card. Everything uses the same interface. That wasn't so from like 2003, 2009. You had really 4 major card types, and you could even argue you had 5. You had PCI, you had LGP. Is that what it was? LGP, LGA? I don't remember. It's been so fucking long, and I'm not going to look it up. It doesn't matter. It was a fucking black connector port on the computer, and it was like 16-bit. It looked like a goddamn Atari card port. Anyway, not the point. You had PCI, you had LGA, you had PCI Express, you had AGP, and then there was another one. It was really only servers only. Though I had a desktop that had this on there. You had PCI X, and so you had all these different fucking card ports. Anyway, the one in question was AGP, and AGP allowed you to put a video card into your computer, and it was a very specialized port. Usually was yellow, gold, orange, some color around there, and you could buy that. But then, the entire industry was like, no, we're going to standardize this. Everybody's going to use the same port. We're not going to have this fucking shit. This is very difficult for us to make, because it was extremely hard to program drivers and everything around having all of these different fucking ports and different goddamn standards. Not only that, but there was also issues with North Bridge versus South Bridge, and sometimes you would like melt your North Bridge just by having an AGP card in there, and sometimes if you decided you wanted an AGP card and a PCI Express card, you could fucking just destroy your goddamn bus. It was a whole thing. It made it more difficult for manufacturers to do their jobs. And, I remember it was very rare for you to have a computer that had both PCI Express and AGP. I remember having to shop for computers back when I did refurbishment so that I had workstations or test beds that had both AGP and PCI Express. And I was so happy when I found them, because it was a pain in the ass to have 4 different fucking computers next to you to make sure that these goddamn graphics cards worked. Anyway, so the whole thing is that as you develop stuff or as you're trying to make things, if you're having to program around these vestigial concepts, you're making your compatibility issues greater. Your compatibility as a developer, as a creator, as a maker of computer products or electrical goods. I don't know what the fuck you want to say. App. Whether you're making an app, whether you're making hardware, whether you're making a website, whatever, it doesn't matter. You should really cast your development cycle. You should really cast your compatibility focus to the 80-20 rule. Really, you should be shooting for 80% compatible so that 80% of your audience is hitting that is hitting the app in the way that you want. And then because then you're only going to spend 20% of the effort. Really, that's what's going to happen. You're only going to spend 20% of the effort if you only have to focus on that top 80%. Because the other 80% effort, you're going to have to spend 4 times as much effort to only hit 20% of the coverage. Now, a lot of this stuff in the app development and website development cycle, a lot of this is taken care of by repositories and other shit. There are things that handle your website compatibility for you. A lot of browsers will do this. So you really only have to focus on the big 3 now. You only have to focus on Chrome and Firefox and Safari to make sure that your website gets displayed properly. But again, my appeal to you is to dump the vestigial piece of shit. Don't worry about daylight savings time. Remove the daylight savings times out of your world, because if you focus on trying to make those compatible or be compatible with those things, it's going to break your focus. You're going to have a worse time, and that is where your focus is going to be diverted from making sure that your application is working properly and that it's properly secured. And it's going to take away from that and may end up ruining your application for everybody else. Well, that's what I got for today. That's all the time I got for this. I hope you guys have a great day.